You're watching PCTV Channel 17, proudly serving the Port Clinton City School District community. The following is a production of the Port Clinton High School Digital Media class.
Welcome to Time for Health. I'm your host, Rachel Fall, and we're very glad you've joined us. We hope you gain something from the program that helps you and your loved ones. We want to arm everyone with as much information as possible so we can all make good choices. And this is not to take the place of regular medical care, so be sure to include your healthcare provider in on your plans and your conversations. Unless your healthcare provider is Dr. Cadigan, and then you can take this maybe a little bit. But today we're talking about food allergies, which is an area that seems to be more and more prevalent. And so you are an expert in terms of being a physician and also being a parent of somebody with food allergies. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
You're a very busy person. You are a family physician in Magruder.
Correct.
You are the president of the medical staff.
Yes.
And Ottawa County coroner.
Elect. Yes.
Wow. So I really appreciate your time being here.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, food allergies. I also have a child who has some allergy issues. So talk a little bit about, is there a difference between when something is just an intolerance versus an allergy? What's the difference?
And I have a unique perspective both as a physician and as a parent of two children with food allergies. An allergy is more of an immune reaction.
Okay.
Your body recognizes something in the food, and your immune system, which normally should react to colds, viruses,
right,
things of that nature, has an overactive reaction to something which normally shouldn't produce a
okay,
response in your body. Typical foods such as peanuts, milk, most people could take and wouldn't have an issue
right,
with. And the child or the adult with food allergy, if they were to take those substances in, their immune system recognizes it as a nasty invader right
okay,
away and really has a hyperactive reaction and attacks and produces all sorts of changes in your body because of that.
Okay, and what are some of those changes that somebody might recognize as an allergy?
The typical reactions that would point more to an allergy would be rash, ranging anything from a small rash to significant swelling, shortness of breath with trouble breathing.
Okay.
Some people could get a shock-like state with low blood pressure, rapid heart rate, sweating. Things that you could see in any other sort of allergic reaction.
Okay, so those are pretty severe. And a food intolerance is maybe you get an upset stomach or...
Right, and the typical thing with the food intolerance, which can be just as disturbing for the person that gets it, but your immune system really isn't involved. Your typical food intolerance would be something like a person that eats too much chocolate and develops migraines. The person that avoids eating beans because it produces gas. I mean, those
okay,
things. And the difference with an intolerance versus an allergy is that an intolerance often requires a larger amount of the food.
Okay.
Whereas with a food allergy, even the slightest taste or contact
right,
can produce a serious reaction.
Why do you think, and I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, why is this more prevalent now? Growing up, I never knew anybody that had any issues with peanuts or soy or milk or anything like that. Do you have any?
And I had this discussion with a retired physician just the other day, and we really don't know why it's become much more prevalent. There's all sorts of theories out there. One of the things we see with a lot of diseases that are more common in the Western world now, it may be related to hygiene-related changes. You would have had a lot more exposure to natural proteins, other natural allergens
okay,
as a child 100 years ago.
Sure.
Nowadays you don't, so the immune system isn't turned on quite as often. And then for some people, when it's turned on, it may turn
Overreacts.
on full reaction with overreaction. The other potential is if you look at a lot of the foods that produce allergies now, they're much more highly processed than they were years ago. And that's my feeling is a lot more of it's probably related to that.
Gotcha.
You go back 100 years, most peanuts were probably going to be eaten as fresh or roasted peanuts.
Right.
Whereas now it's more common as peanut butter and it's highly refined, highly processed.
Right.
And when you do that, you concentrate everything that's in
Okay.
the product.
Okay.
Milk doesn't just come from the local farm anymore. Milk is heated, pasteurized, again processed. And in that course of processing, there may be some natural substances removed as well that maybe serve as a buffer to an allergy.
Okay.
So we're not quite sure exactly why it happens, but it tends to be much more prominent in the Western world.
Okay.
And it probably is related both to the processing of food and less exposure to natural stimulants for your immune system in early childhood.
Well, that's the best explanation
So,
I've ever heard.
that's the best I come up with.
Well, that's good. You mentioned something about children and adults. Are most of these allergies in children? Do they outgrow them? Do adults still have these?
The interesting thing with food allergies is the prevalence is so much higher than people suspect because of the varying degrees of allergies. And obviously we all hear of people with the severe allergies, and some things can produce more severe allergies. But pretty well everybody knows somebody that has a food allergy or a reaction of that sort. The numbers are actually about 9 million adults and 6 million children. So 15 million people in this country have food allergies. And that,
to varying degrees.
Yeah, to varying degrees. When you total it up, it works out to about 14% of the U.S. population.
Wow.
Now the majority of those are going to have milder reactions.
Okay.
And the majority of those aren't going to necessarily seek a lot of medical care, because once you know you react to something, your natural tendency is to avoid it.
Not going to have that.
But when you look at it as a public health issue rather than even a personal health issue, the number of emergency room or urgent care or even ambulatory physician office visits in an average year for children, you're looking at people under the age of 16 for allergy-related visits, is about 300,000. And if you average out, which I found kind of startling, if you average out that even with minimal testing at $100 cost to the health system per visit, you're looking at $30 million or more a year in healthcare costs directly attributable to food allergy.
Wow.
Yeah. And the prevalence has increased. I mean, it's about, peanut allergy has increased about fourfold in the last 20 years.
Wow. So is that mostly what happens? Is that how a parent finds out? They give their kid a peanut butter sandwich or something, they have a reaction, and they go to the ER? Or?
Typically, it's found through trial and error, unfortunately. Somebody eats something, somebody goes to school and comes home with a rash, and they try to figure out, it's usually, most of them are diagnosed through observation that way. In fact, I mean, from the school's perspective, about 25% of the first reactions actually occur in the school setting. So for school administrators, teachers, school nurses, I mean, that can be a harrowing and exciting in a bad way sort of thing, because let's say 25% of the reactions are going to occur there the first time around. And that's the instance in my own family. My child's first reaction was coming home from preschool with hives. And then we narrow it down to being a peanut allergy.
Gotcha.
So.
And there's varying degrees. There are some where you get hives, there's some where you stop breathing, there's some where your immune system goes into overdrive if you eat it. There's some that it can't even be around, like smelled in the air or on another person or anything like that. Yeah.
Typically, most commonly, you have to ingest or eat the substance. Some people will have the degree of sensitivity to even breathing into particles in the air, particularly with peanut. Peanut tends to be the strongest allergen in that regard, and that's one that people often don't outgrow. You look at the other common allergens, milk, wheat, soy, tree nuts, fish and shellfish. Pretty well milk, wheat, soy, people will often outgrow those to various degrees. Egg allergies, very common to outgrow those as you get older. And a lot of it depends how the food's prepared too. With peanut, outside of something highly refined and heat treated like peanut oil, which people tend not to react to even with peanut allergies. Generally most of the time with anything with peanut you need to avoid. Some people with egg allergies, if it's a highly cooked egg or the egg's baked into a food, they can eat it and not react. But the safe presumption for anybody with an allergy is that, until you are told you can eat it, if you're a physician, and unfortunately sometimes it's through accidental ingestion, your best bet is to avoid altogether, because you never know what that reaction is going to be or how life-threatening that reaction is going to be.
And I say this at the beginning of every show, but certainly for this kind of a topic, the best thing to do is to talk with your physician about it and not necessarily try to do too much experimenting on your own,
Right.
especially if you're talking about stopping breathing and things like
Right,
that.
yeah.
So is that what you tell, like you give them a little zone of, okay, you can experiment with this, but
I generally don't give much of an experimental zone. Generally you're going to see somebody in the office for the first time when they've had a report of a reaction either at home or at school. And from a primary care doctor's perspective at that point, you're generally going to refer them to an allergist. And your definitive diagnosis, say this definitely is food allergy. It's a combination of skin testing.
Right.
There's a type of blood testing called RAS testing, although it gives you an idea, but it's nowhere near as accurate as skin testing.
Okay.
And the most accurate test is a food challenge. Now, if you're going to food challenge somebody, that's not something you want to do at home in the basement.
Right.
Here's your peanut, try it, see if you react still. Even children I've seen that have gone on to food challenges actually have done it. The allergist will even bring them to a hospital to do that rather than
Just
do
in
it
case.
in an office setting.
Sure.
They'll do it in a hospital with a full emergency kit on standby and
Just in case.
take 7 or 8 hours and gradually give them very small and increasing amounts of it over time. One of my children with an egg allergy, that's what we did in terms of egg allergen testing, and it was done under very, very controlled settings. So it's not something you really should experiment with at
Gotcha.
home. Whether you have an Epipen or other treatment at home, those treatments buy you time. They don't definitively treat the problem when it
Gotcha.
comes on. So,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
strictly your if something happened and it's an emergency, that
Gotcha.
buys you time to get to the ER.
Okay.
It's the big thing with that.
Okay, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about next. But first, we're going to take a break, and we will be back in just a minute to talk more about food allergies with Dr. Cadian. We're talking about food allergies with Dr. Cadigan, and we kind of differentiated in the beginning an allergy versus an intolerance. When it's an allergy, your body, your immune system kicks in a little bit hyperactively and sort of attacks whatever you're eating or breathing or whatever. And it can be very, very serious. It can be, something like a rash, or it can go into troubles with breathing. And so in peanuts, we even talked a little bit about why this may be more prevalent now, and spending a lot of time on peanut allergies because that seems to be so prevalent. And your wife and I have had a conversation actually, because my son, who has a peanut issue, he sometimes, if I'll give him something and I look at the box and there's no nuts, it wasn't processed or whatever, he'll take a piece of, it was just a piece of plain chocolate, and he was like, and he kind of smelled it and he put it back. And I think she said one of your sons did the same thing, maybe with an M&M or something like that, probably before this all came out. I think they know. They can kind of smell, they sense. He will refuse things that I think, well, that has nothing to do with peanuts, but he knows, so.
Right. And children often will know, even adults will often avoid things, Taste is one thing. You may taste something and say, I just don't like the taste of it, but people will often avoid foods because they just don't feel well when they take it. And my son was a classic example. I mean, when he was probably 3, I never liked peanut butter, and whenever my wife would try him with something that had some peanut in it, he'd say, I don't feel good, it makes my stomach feel bad. And the thought was kind of, gee, he's just like you.
Yeah.
But then in hindsight it was, well, it really was making him feel bad.
Right.
And it truly,
Actually
that was his
physically.
early signs that
Okay.
he really didn't tolerate that. So, one of the things would be if it's, if your child constantly doesn't want to eat the broccoli because they say it doesn't feel right to them, if they want to avoid their vegetables all the time, you've got to take that with a grain of salt and say it's truly. But if you're looking at the major allergens, peanut, tree nuts like cashews, things of that nature, milk, if you got a child that constantly says his stomach hurts after he drinks milk, kids that say they don't feel well after they eat eggs, wheat products, stomach upset, nausea, bloating, things of that nature of the wheat products can be a sign of a wheat allergy. And particularly fish and shellfish, usually that's going to manifest itself with trouble breathing. Those ones particularly tend to manifest with trouble breathing or with with a rash.
Okay.
You know, kind of take it to heart and get it checked out.
Right. They're not just being picky
right.
and difficult.
And the thing to remember is that can happen at any time in life. You know, my parents both grew up as the children of fishermen. They ate fish all their lives. My mother developed a severe allergic reaction to salmon in her mid-50s. You know, kind of landed her in the ICU. And we had eaten salmon, you know, fresh salmon kind of off the boat, you know, at least once a week forever. And then it was to the point where it couldn't even be cooked in the house. You know, my dad would cook outside on the barbecue if you wanted a piece of fish and eat outside in the winter because just the smell of it in the air was enough to produce a severe reaction. So you know, the fact that you've made it through your childhood and otherwise without a reaction doesn't mean that you can't develop one later in life.
Right. And it makes life a bit difficult. Cooking fish on the grill in Canada in the winter is probably not real fun.
Kind of cold.
How have you, or how do you manage, you know, just grocery shopping? Although food labeling has gotten better, but going out to eat, especially with egg or milk, I mean, that is in every recipe.
Egg or milk are probably some of the trickiest ones. Peanut, particularly, they tend to label, although and you can generally judge what the main things are going to have peanut in them. But you've got to read labels. If you go to a restaurant, you certainly have to look at where you're eating. If there's a peanut allergy, you know, there's certain types of food, Indian food, Thai food, you may just have to avoid because there's a lot of peanut used within it, and you can't expect the restaurateur to be able to prevent cross-contamination with everything at that point. Right. You know, you've got to take a certain personal responsibility and say, you know, I just need to avoid eating someplace where I may have that reaction. When you eat out, the big thing certainly is to let the server know you have an allergy. You don't want a reaction to be a surprise for them either. And most places will make the effort to cook things separately. You know,
unless of course it's part of their entire cuisine, like Thai food.
And in which case, you know, they can certainly let you know, and then you have the choice to whether you're going to dine there. Food labels have gotten much better over the last 15 years. I mean, there's a lot of mandated changes. They often are vague, but usually the very last line on the back of a label will say contains. You know, my grocery shopping went from half an hour to an hour and a half because you're standing in the store and reading every label on the back of things. The biggest trick is the hidden things that you don't expect it. You know, with peanut, you know you're going to watch your chocolate, candies, things of that nature, because there's a lot of peanut used in chocolate products, and most of those are going to be produced in the same factory. You know, the things you don't think about, if you have a dog at home and you buy them dog treats, a lot of dog treats may have peanut butter in them. And you're not going to think that
you hand it to the dog and it's on your hand.
Yeah, it's on your hand, and you know you've got to do a lot of hand washing. Or your child decides to hand one to the dog, and you know you don't even think it's not a peanut product. The hidden things, there's actually a large number of other products that are made from substances that produce allergies that may not be the substance. And my classic example from personal experience, caramel coloring in ice cream syrup. And I bought some caramel syrup when my oldest was young and put it on his ice cream, and as he's starting to eat, I'm looking at the back of the label and it says caramel coloring and then in brackets from eggs. Now I never would have thought that, you know, caramel ice cream topping had anything to do with eggs.
No.
So, you know, I'm standing over him with the Epipen, and he's just looking at me like I'm the crazy father. And but you don't think of those things.
No.
You think if it doesn't say egg, it doesn't say egg. But if you have a family member or a child with allergies, you really need to get online, and there are some good places to find that information, and recognize the 8 or 10 other products that come from the substance that the allergy is present to.
And a couple of my children, their classrooms are nut-free, and they have provided a list of things that are typically nut-free. But it says at the bottom, read the label every time, because just because so-and-so animal crackers are nut-free now, they might change the way they produce them later, so you always have to read.
Exactly, and you know, particularly now with economics the way they are, you know, manufacturer producing an animal cracker, for example, may use a standard set of ingredients for a year, and then all of a sudden one of the ingredients goes up in price. So to keep the product cost effective, they're going to substitute something else. So the labeling can change. So you've got to constantly read labels and constantly be vigilant.
And in restaurants also, they, you know, every time, just because you've been there a couple times, you have to tell them every time that you have an allergy. And again, the way they prepare food may have changed there as well. So there's a little bit of homework and a little bit of diligence. And
Absolutely.
certainly, depending on the reaction, you need to do that every time. You have mentioned a couple of times Epipens.
Okay.
I know just enough to be dangerous, as I do about a lot of things. Talk about those.
EpiPens are really the standard first-line treatment
Okay.
for allergies. Any child or adult with an allergy really should look at having two components in their kind of rescue kit. One would be an antihistamine.
Okay.
Most commonly used is going to be Benadryl.
Right.
Some people will use other branded or off-brand antihistamines. The EpiPen is epinephrine, and that produces the fastest response.
Okay.
You know, the problem with an antihistamine is it takes time to kick in. It takes
Gotcha.
time that you swallow it. It takes time to absorb it. If you're short of breath, if you're having swelling in your airway, your throat, you may not swallow it quite as quickly. EpiPen is a preloaded pen with epinephrine. It has a hidden needle, so it's not something you're walking around with a needle exposed at all
Right,
times.
okay.
But if you have a reaction, you basically just pull it out, place your thumb on the top, press it into your leg, the needle will come out and automatically injects the medication. And what the EpiPen does is produce a fairly rapid improvement in
Okay.
your symptoms, particularly life-threatening symptoms, but it buys you time to get further medical attention.
Okay.
You know, it's not the sort of thing that if you feel like you're having a severe reaction that you should use your EpiPen and then sit on the couch and say, I'm fine, because it might just be buying you 10 minutes of relief before things flare again.
Gotcha.
It's ideally the time to allow EMS to get there or for you to get to the emergency
Okay.
room so you can be monitored further.
And I didn't know that. I kind of thought it was the treatment. You just use the EpiPen and you're good to go. You can go back to class or go wherever. And a cousin of mine is allergic to bees, and he said, I kind of waited. I got stung by a bee. There's some bees he's allergic to, some he's not, and he kind of waited because he said it just buys you time. And I was like, it does? So
Yeah.
that was kind of what
And the other
prompted.
thing is not necessarily to wait a long time before using it. I
Right.
think that everybody's natural tendency is, I'll see how bad this gets. A child that's in school should have an allergy action plan. And there are
Right.
standardized forms,
Right.
and it will say, these are the symptoms,
is
use
what you do.
this.
Yeah.
If you start getting the first slightest indication, if you get a little tiny bit of a rash when you've eaten something around your lips, that could just be a little bit of a contact reaction. You can give a little bit of time with that. If you eat something, you're breaking out in a rash in your arms or your legs, or you feel like your heart breathing is getting difficult at all, that's the time to step in and use your EpiPen.
Gotcha.
Not to wait till see if it gets worse.
And that is something that is prescribed, or you just get them over the counter?
EpiPens are
Okay.
prescribed. It's an evolving issue in terms of how they're managed in schools.
Sure.
The ideal is for that pen to be with the person that needs it.
Right.
Every school has different policies, and there's a lot more nationally in terms of setting up guidelines for that. But it often needs to be an immediate response.
Right.
So it's the sort of thing that having, if you've got a 2-year-old or a second grader, obviously, they're not even going to necessarily know how to use it well themselves.
Right.
But the high schooler, the middle schooler who has potentially a severe allergy really needs to be able to use that immediately.
Right.
And the time to get from the second floor to the third floor, from one end of the school to the nurse's office, and hope that the nurse is in there and not somewhere else.
Right.
That can
be
be
an
far too
issue.
long a period of time. So there is a lot more effort right now, I think, on the behalf of schools to put these plans in place and to have
Okay.
things readily available for children with allergies.
And what happens if a child, they're starting a little bit of a rash somewhere and they think they're having a reaction and they use the EpiPen, and here it was it was something else, like their sweater was itching them or something like that. What happens if you use the EpiPen and you weren't having a...
It's going to wear off
Okay.
in a while. I mean, the most EpiPens are epinephrine. Epinephrine basically is your body's natural adrenaline.
Okay.
So when you use your EpiPen, your heart rate's going to speed up. You may get a bit shaky.
Okay.
But it's rapidly into your system. It's fairly rapidly out of your system.
Okay.
So 3 hours later, you're not going to still feel bad, but you might have that kind of little bit of a hyped up or wired feeling for the
Okay.
next 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay.
But that's, again,
And it's not going to do
that's
any
the
long-term
ideal.
damage. You haven't introduced anything. Okay.
No.
Okay. Big issue, lots of things and lots of variances in reactions. Are there common things that you see, or some parting message, Dan's top 3 things you want people to know about food allergies? Or?
I think the biggest things I would say is, if you have any sort of reaction, get tested. you really need to know for sure if you have an allergy. And having said that, the science isn't 100% just yet. You know, you may be tested, you may have to go through your days presuming you're allergic to something, and maybe you only have a skin reaction, but
Gotcha.
you're not going to know if it's a more severe reaction unless you eat the product, and you're better off not trying to do that and just using avoidance. You know, the biggest thing is educating the public in general. There is a tendency to kind of think of an allergy as, well, okay, this is an annoyance. This kid might get a rash if he eats something, and particularly in the school settings. You know, it's educating within the school and the parent community
Sure.
within the school that this is something that can be a life-threatening reaction. You know, it's unfortunately a accommodation that has to be made.
Right.
But I think schools are doing a very good job of that now. But, you know, parents, I would put out the parents to be aware that, you know, that peanut butter your child has for lunch potentially could kill my child.
Right.
It's not to say that I want your child's peanut butter gone, but when you know I ask that my child sit at a different table,
Right.
There's
Right.
there's a valid reason
Or
for that.
birthday, I mean, birthday
Birthday
treats and
treats
holiday
and so
treats.
on, yeah.
Well, just one time won't hurt.
Right, and that's the biggest thing is having that allergen-free area. You know, schools avoiding food in the classroom, trying to keep food in the cafeteria, things of that nature. The biggest thing with allergy, I would say, is that you're responsible. Your primary responsibility is for yourself. If you are a child or an adult with food allergy, you've got to learn about it. You've got to be your primary advocate. You can't expect other people to do that for you.
Gotcha.
So at the same time as saying, you know, I would like other people to certainly be aware and,
Right.
and mindful that it potentially is a serious issue, the primary responsibility is the individuals themselves. It's not the community's responsibility to make sure you stay away from your egg or your milk or your
Right.
peanuts. It's your
Your
responsibility.
responsibility. Sure. Great. Awesome. Thank you very much for
Okay.
your time.
No problem. You're welcome.
We're going to take another break and we'll be right back. And we're back. I want to thank Dr. Cadigan for being our guest today, talking about food allergies, especially with kids. It can be pretty scary sometimes. There are varying levels of reactions. There are all kinds of things to consider. And some of the things he talked about were getting tested and making sure you understand what you are and are not allergic to, having a plan, understanding that it's going to take some time and some responsibility on the part of the person with the allergy, or if it's a young child, their family, in terms of reading labels and going out and school treats and all that kind of stuff. It does take a little bit of work, but obviously it's for a very good reason. We're also going to list website and some different resources up for people to learn more information, since it is such a complicated topic, a complex topic with lots of pieces and parts. So certainly learned a lot today, and again want to thank Dr. Cadigan. If you ever have feedback about a program or a suggestion for a future episode, just let us know. Send a note to Time for Health, 615 Fulton Street, Port Clinton, Ohio, 43452, or you can email Carla Pelz at the high school, cpelz@pccsd.net. So again, take something that you learned today, whether you yourself, somebody you know has an allergy, encourage them to get with their physician and come up with a plan. Certainly very important information. And as always, until we meet again, I encourage you to make time for health.